Hello everyone, my name is Ahmed Gomaa, and this is my oral defense for my Master's in the Arts of Teaching. The thesis is the teaching literacy comprehension to English second language learners using the SIAP model. I am joined by my committee members, Mr. Richard Delgado and Mr. Ahmed. And I will talk with you right now about my study and the findings in terms of using the sheltered instruction observation protocol. To begin, it's been an ongoing discussion between American educators and international colleagues that has been ongoing about what are the proper instructional methods or approaches to be used to teaching English second language learners, primarily in reading comprehension and improving their language development at the same time. According to Farstrop and Samuels, it is important that educators are aware of different instructional models for ESL learners in order to consistently replicate the research-based literacy practices and the impact these models can have on the oral language, reading, and writing comprehension of ESL students. Over the years, the minority students in the U.S. Have increased, where the classrooms are getting larger, with more English second language learners in elementary and secondary classrooms. Another research proven method by McIntyre, Bellman, and Chen and Munoz have showed that teachers are concerned over the fact that many ESL learners have low academic achievement, and there's a lack of research that really shows what may be the best techniques to use to instruct these ESL learners. One of the more recent approaches that has come up in recent years has been the use of the sheltered instruction observation protocol, which was created by Echevira, Vaught, and Short, originally around 2004. And this has shown to be an effective approach improving the reading and writing comprehension among the ESL learners in American schools. The model itself is a guide of 8 components for teaching content and a step-by-step process, and a method of evaluation of implementation of the instructions. The purpose of this study, this action research study, is to see how the SIAP model of sheltered instruction can improve the language and reading comprehension of ESL students. Ideally, the research questions that would be answered were: 1, how will the SIAP model influence the first grade ESL student in reading comprehension? Secondly, how much oral language development will the student gain throughout the model? And thirdly is, how consistent was I, the instructor, in implementing the model? The improvement of oral language reading and writing for ESL students is a problem many teachers face. This study will provide other primary educators who teach in international schools the insights into the SIAP model for teaching ESL learners. This model has proven to be effective in the international primary grades. To list a few things, especially primary limitations to the research that I felt like I might face, first and foremost is the fact that I'm not sure what the students did outside the classroom in terms of brushing up on their language development. Secondly, I don't know if students were getting any tutoring involved outside the classroom, or how much involvement their parents may have. And another factor is the idea that I was not properly trained in the SIAP model, that my resource is a book that the founders of the model have put out. Tests that the kids will be using will be administered by the ESL instructor, so that could have an impact on the scores as well in terms of how they respond to someone else giving them a test, as opposed to the classroom instructor. I took the approach of reading the literature in terms of looking at non-SIAP approaches, then the idea of ESL training for content teachers, and then some sheltered instruction approaches. So ideally, these are just methods that have shown to improve the gains in reading comprehension and language development of ESL students, primarily at the elementary level. So to start off, one example was use the effectiveness of peer-assisted learning, which is the idea of combining a high-level reader in the classroom with a low-level reader, and that they can model, that the low-level reader can model from the high-level reader. And this is shown to be beneficial in improving the level of the struggling ESL student when paired with the high-level reader. Another non-science approach was by Page, who compared the use of semantic clustering and thematic clustering of vocabulary words during second language instruction. His results showed that both groups had improved their scores using either method. Now, moving on to training content teachers to improve instruction for ESL students, one of the problems that some content teachers have had is that they may lack the skill to teach ESL students properly. Hence why we have ESL specific instructors in the school that help as special support for some of these students. She examined 4 factors: the teacher's knowledge of language acquisition, teacher knowledge concerning instructional adaptation, teacher's knowledge of integrating language and content, and parental involvement. When finding the responses to these, she found that the ESL teachers had longer responses in terms of how they go about each one of these compared to the content teacher, which in turn still relates to the idea that the content teacher does not have a strong background in teaching ESL students. Hence, their responses would most likely be longer at the same time in tackling each one of these factors. And then one other research we can look at was by Back, which he researched the perceptions of English language learners and how they may overcome the biggest challenges educating them. And the study was seeking solutions to design professional development for the short term and to rethink education and proactive work for the long term. So once again, how can we train content teachers to be better prepared for ESL students? And Bad's work supports the research done by both. The need for classroom content teachers to be trained in teaching ELL and to collaborate with ELL bilingual students needs to be more established to create greater results. Finally, we're going to move into the use of sheltered instruction. And sheltered instruction, or SIOP, is a guide that teachers have been using to teach content to all students simultaneously in developing literacy skills. There are 8 components of which the model includes. This is lesson preparation, building background, comprehensible inputs, strategies, interaction, practice application, lesson delivery, review, and assessment. One thing that Shavira, Vaught, and Short have suggested is that there are 3 indicators of this component for teachers when they are planning, is that the concept of linked students' backgrounds, links between past learning and new learning, and developing key vocabulary. In another study, Belden, Chen, Powell, McIntyre, and Munoz examined the relationship between professional development, teachers learning the model, and student achievement reading. Ideally, what they found here is out of the 7, they had 23 teachers where they were working with to train SIOP. 7 of them were the ones that implemented the process properly. Those students that they had, those 7 teachers, showed significant gains in their reading comprehension and language development compared to those students that were in the other classes where the model wasn't implemented properly. So the idea of the SIOP model has been shown to work effectively in the sense that the SIOP model is not one specific approach. It consists of all the approaches that we may know about. The important thing about the SIOP model to remember is that it is a way to self-evaluate yourself implementing these approaches. Now, moving on to the methodology. Ideally, the study took place in the American International School in Cairo. It's in the 3rd year of operation. Our school consists of 176 days of student-teacher contact days. The majority of the students here are Egyptian. Our school offers pre-kindergarten to 10th grade at the moment. As stated, the majority of the school students are Egyptian, so there is quite a lack of diversity in the sense that 95% of the students are from Egypt, with 5% coming outside of Egypt. The participants in the study are the students from my first grade class, 16 first grade students. The age range is from 6 to 7. Ideally, 13 of the students are born in Egypt. 2 of the students are half and half, but grew up their entire life in Egypt. And 1 student is from Libya. The student from Libya has been out of school for 10 months. So he came to us in the middle of the year, so he was a little bit far behind the rest of the classmates. But, the other participant is the teacher. As I said before, I'll be a teacher participant in terms of implementing the SciENT model, but also being evaluated on how well I've implemented the model. My background in the sense that I myself was an ESL student, which drew me to the idea of doing a study like this. The difference between myself and the students is that I was born in the States and grew up in the States, but like these students, I have an Egyptian background. But going through the American school system, I developed my language much quicker than these students have. The design and data collection will be based on mixed method design. Ideally, the use of the model showed how much improvement in reading comprehension we'd have with students. The students would be assessed twice over a 13-week period, and their scores concentrate on reading comprehension and being able to retell what happens in the story. At the same time, they will be assessed twice throughout the study on oral language development through an interview process. And then the last portion of the study will be myself being evaluated every lesson by the ESL instructor, which I forgot to mention, the ESL instructor is also a participant who has been working for 10 years professionally as an ESL instructor. And typically would be our support in the classroom, but since she will be my evaluator, she'll be spending time evaluating me as opposed to offering support in the classroom. With that said, she will be administering DIBELS, and DIBELS was administered first at the beginning of the year. The dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills, which is what we've implemented in the school for a couple of years now. It gives us a good idea of where the kids stand and allowed me to kind of pre-test them before the intervention of the SciENT model. So I had an idea of where they stood, basing it on oral reading fluency and retail fluency. And then at the same time, I would give them an interview on oral language development to see where their level stood. And with that said, the data for DIBELS in the pre-intervention period started in the 3rd term and end of the 4th term. So the study took place over a 13-week period. We had 1 week off for spring. So it was actual 12 weeks of student-teacher contact days with that 1 week of spring vacation. That were taken, and as I said, allowed me to get a closer look at where each student stood based on their skill level. And if there might be students I might need to give additional support to that were really struggling. The SciENT model was implemented after the first week of pre-testing the students. And each lesson of mine contained the 8 components of the model: preparation, building background, approaches which include explicitly linking concepts to students' backgrounds and experiences, comprehensive input, which includes using speech appropriate for students, level with proper enunciation and simple sentence structure, strategies, which includes opportunities for students to use, such as student problem solving, predicting, organizing, interaction, which includes providing opportunities for academic discussion, group sizes for maximum language development, practice application, providing hands-on materials, if applicable, authentic activities for applying content and skills, and opportunities for integrating all language skills, and lesson delivery, which would incorporate high student engagement, and finally, review and assessment in terms of how the students did based on the lesson that was presented to them. Each week, the literacy lesson would use a different text, whether it was a big book or from A to Z reading. Daily assessment was done by a variety of techniques. I would meet with each student for a one-on-one conference to assess their language development. The students would be scored on what they told me about the story based on syntax, vocabulary, and elaboration. The conference sessions occurred 2 times, and ideally, to develop their oral language, I used some coding because oral language was more of a qualitative aspect of the mixed method design. And in terms of interviewing them on questions about what happened in the stories, characters in the stories, things of those natures, setting and whatnot, I would take their response and put it into numerical values so we look at the ways to organize them. You have syntax, vocabulary, and elaboration, as I mentioned. Syntax, the ranges from the oral language development go from 4 to 1, 4 being strong, 1 being a little bit lower. Vocabulary, same idea, 4 uses interesting vocabulary. Some of the time, including use of descriptive adverbs or adjectives. A 1, unable to name some of the elements of the picture, lack of vocabulary impedes the storytelling. 2 and 3 fall between that. Elaboration relates to the elements in the picture while using extensive prior knowledge and past experiences. They're narrative, substantive, and well organized. 1 gives labels for elements in the pictures, and 3 and 2 fall into that category. And then, ideally, with the last week of the study is where I would give, or the ESL instructor would give the final portion of the dibbles, which is another reading passage. Ideally, the way the dibbles was scored was the student would read words, and if the words were read correctly, after a minute, the number of words would be calculated and read correctly. And then the student would retell what they read in a minute as well. And then the amount of words used to retell would be marked down, and then a percentage would be given in accuracy. Ideally, then, each day I would be evaluated by the ESL instructor in terms of my silent implementation, and after a number of lessons, which turned out to be 58 lessons where the silent model was implemented, I averaged a score for an overall result of how I implemented this silent procedure. Moving on. We will get into the results of the study. As I said before, this occurred over a 13-week period, where there was 1 week off for a spring vacation. And the data was used for several reasons: to observe the students' oral language, reading comprehension, and who would need to be monitored closely for additional support afterwards. Looking at the first set of scores, when we look at the dibbles, Dibbles was used to measure the students' oral reading fluency and retail fluency, which indicated their comprehension of the text. The results from the first question of how their reading comprehension and retail fluency occurred, the intervention showed that the students improved on their scores. Ideally, 8 of the students showed an increase in oral reading fluency after the intervention. There were 6 students that had a decrease in oral reading fluency after the intervention, but it was not too significant. And there were only 2 students that showed no change in their ORF accuracy. Student A had the highest gain of 29% increased fluency, followed by student D who had 20% increased fluency. Student E had the highest decline of 8% in oral reading fluency. The class overall showed an increase of 4% in oral reading fluency as a whole from the pre-intervention of the SIAP model and then from the post-intervention. The retail fluency showed gains as well. 13 students showed increased scores of the retelling text. There were 2 students that showed a decreased score of retelling the text, while 1 student did not say anything. Student E showed the most significant gain of 90 more words used in retelling the passage, and student C showed an increase of 43 more words. Student O showed the highest decrease in words used to retell the passage at 33, while student M used 11 words less. That showed an increase of 60 more words used in the passage. So that was a gain as well. Moving on to question 2, dealing with the student's oral language development. The results from the oral language development showed students before and after development, and that there were only 3 students out of the 16 that had no gain. So that's still very positive results. 11 out of the 16 students showed a gain in at least one of the aspects of oral language development, whether it be syntax, vocabulary, or elaboration. Only 2 students showed no positive gains in the language development. Therefore, no student showed any decrease in their language development from the intervention. Student J had the greatest gain of all the students on language development. The student improved 2 points in syntax and elaboration and 1 point in vocabulary. This resulted in a score of 4 in each category, which is the highest that a student can achieve. There were 3 students that achieved a score of 4 in each aspect, which gave a total of 6 students to receive the highest totals in language development. 69% of the students showed improvement in syntax, 62% of the students showed improvement in vocabulary and elaboration, and there were a total of 5 students that had no change in the results at all. Overall, the students showed a 17.5% increase in syntax after the intervention. The students improved in vocabulary by 15%, and they improved in elaboration by 17.5%. Going to the final question in terms of how the SIAP model is implemented. When scoring the SIAP model, there's a grand total of 120 points you can get on the SIAP protocol. And the ESL instructor scored me at 97 possible points out of 120, which approximately gave me 80.8% of proper implementation of the SIAP model. There was a total of 50 literacy lessons given during the intervention period, to which I was using the SIAP. Ideally, just as a quick rundown, the preparation category showed an average score of 3.5. You're out of 4. 4 was the highest you can get, 0 on the lowest. The next component was building background, which had an average score of 4. The comprehensive input category had an average score of 3. The strategies category had an average score of 3 as well. Interaction had an average score of 3.5. Practice application had an average score of 2. There was no score for the hands-on materials because that was very difficult to incorporate with teaching reading comprehension and modeling. The lesson delivery category had an average score of 3.25, and the review and assessment of the lesson had an average score of 3. Now, moving on to the final chapter of discussion and looking at the summary of the findings. The findings of this action research study suggests the use of the sheltered instruction observation protocol can help students with language, second language learners improve on their literacy skills and oral language development. with limited resources. Being able to follow a step-by-step process and to be evaluated on my instruction proved to be very beneficial in improving my teaching methods. Looking at each aspect, there was improvement in each aspect of the study in terms of oral reading, fluency, retail fluency, and their language development. Ideally, the findings suggest that the students improved on their reading comprehension with an increase in vocabulary used to retell the text, which goes along with some of the earlier background information that I mentioned, where 3 indicators for components for teachers to address in a plan with concepts linked to students' background, links between past learning and new learning, and developing key vocabulary. Looking at question 2, how much development first grade ESOLs demonstrated from the model showed significant gains in well with the reading comprehension, which in turn led them to develop better language development. Some of the studies by Belden, Chen, and Munoz found that students were enrolled in classes of SCI models showed better gains. The SCI model implemented a lot of different approaches. One of the keys was the fact of writing out a lot of information, whether it be the content, the objective, everything that revolves. So they always had exposure to the lessons, which was very a positive impact from having that exposure. I guess out of the 3 categories when it came to oral language, the idea of elaboration, how many students scored so highly on it, was what impressed me the most. Because elaboration requires a lot more of that higher order thinking skill. And the fact that they were using proper syntax and vocabulary to construct their thinking skills not only shows their development in language, but more so their thought process with it, and how they were using their words, and how they were really being more descriptive and more accurate in what they were saying. And that's what I found to be quite impressive. And then ideally, in terms of the SCI model, as I said, I implemented it at 80.8%, which is pretty positive. My strong point was building backgrounds. My weakest point was the idea of using the lack of hands-on materials. My strength, the meaningful activities I did well on, I could be a little bit more clear. The content comprehensible output could be a little clearer, and I could find strategies to create more comprehension. Interaction was positive, with the exception of group configurations. Not too much homogeneous grouping did occur. Practice and application was positive, and the lack of no hands-on material is one factor that I'll have to work on as well. Ideally, the delivery of the lesson was positive, and the review and assessment was positive as well. To conclude this, I will quickly give the conclusion and some implications of the study. The SCI model is a very positive tool and approach to use to teach ESL students in the classroom with limited resources. And it was beneficial in American classrooms where you have a mixture of students. Here you have full-on Egyptian second language learners where there was positive gains made. I would have done several things differently with this, primarily gotten myself trained more. In the SCI model, I would have conducted my study throughout the school year, from beginning to end. I would like to have compared the results to another first grade class that was not using the SCI model, just to see the difference between them. And I would implement the model to each first grade class that I teach and compare the results from year to year. Ideally, there's several implications I see of the SCI model having for others. One is the idea of planning meaningful activities to meet the objectives of each lesson. Both the student and teacher will have a clear focus on the lesson for mastering skill, teaching academic vocabulary, such as calculate, predict, comparison, and the result of, which you terms that kids seem to have a tougher time with. Third implication was the use of the guided practice, where they became more actively involved, which allowed them to comprehend directions much better. And another implication from the model is a variety of strategies are involved, from peer support to graphic organizers to enhance the student lesson. I would recommend that colleagues try to use this approach in the classroom, and I hope that my study has allowed them a new way of teaching. I know now that I feel like I've improved my teaching skills. On top of that, I've been able to find what my strengths and weaknesses are, where I need to improve when I deliver lessons, especially to ESL students. But also, it'll be beneficial to non-ESL students within their areas. And at that point, I will conclude my defense. I will leave the floor open out for any questions that you might have.
Did you find that there were any problems when you were using the on-site approaches, and did they conflict at all with the SIOP protocol?
If there's any problems, not so much, because ideally you can use any approach. The important thing is that you're putting up the content objective on the board and making sure that your language is clear. You can use any approach, but you have to be very clear in your instruction. And that's what I found. If there is a time where I wasn't giving the instructions clearly, then the kids were struggling with a non-SIOP approach. Because technically, the SIOP approach is the checklist that reviews what I've incorporated. All those non-SIOP approaches that I mentioned earlier, they're not in SIOP because you're not using the protocol pretty much to check things off on what you've implemented in the lesson. The non-SIOP approaches, though, are approaches that can be incorporated in the SIOP model. So there wasn't too much of that because I was using a variety of techniques that, in the end, I get to evaluate or be evaluated, get to review how I implemented the lesson using that strategy.
I understand that you mentioned that the method or the SIOP model does not use just one approach, but there were one or two in particular that you could tell me that the students reacted to in terms of engagement, or you found most beneficial for the students. Would you focus on one or two of them so I could take it back to my classroom?
I think there's a few. I think the key to anything, especially with the SIOP, is building the background knowledge. And I felt that when I put more time in building the background knowledge with the students, they were more involved. They made the connection. And as educators, we know that when the students can make a connection to what's being presented to them, they're going to be more involved. They understand what's happening. And at the same time, they are more confident. And so one of the things that I always did and enjoyed doing was when we did assessments on the literacy, sometimes I did group work. So ideally, I'd have the kids group up. It wasn't, as I said, not too much homogeneous, but I like to mix it up. But I had them work together in terms of, drawing a picture of what they saw and what they remember from the story, and then writing together sentences. So sometimes I mix the groups up where I would have a strong student with a weaker student. So, kind of that peer assistance. And then the idea of just group work together so they're a little bit involved. But also with the group work, I found that they're communicating more, so they're using the language a lot more. And the peer assistant was something that was used by another researcher as one approach. But as you see at SIOP, you kind of have the privilege, or not the privilege, but the opportunity where you can mix and match a lot of approaches together. One person can sit and say, I'm going to read the story to the students, and then they can kind of go back and work together as a group. Or, I combine the two approaches at the same time where they do group work, but I did peer assisting as well at the same time. So you can kind of learn, because we have so many, not every student's language, ESL or English language is at the same level. The ones that might speak a little stronger there are tools that you can utilize in the classroom to help instruct the other ones. That's probably what I kind of enjoyed or found to be the most beneficial, because at the same time the kids were having fun. I mean, they get to kind of be moving around a little bit, so you get a little bit of like the kinetics into it, like verbal and visual and auditory as well. So I mean, you're combining a lot of different things with that, and that's that's what I enjoy the most. I think that it can be useful in a lot of classes, a lot of grade levels as well.
I was really interested when you were talking about how the relationship between the ESL instructor and the content teacher. I'm wondering if you notice a difference in your relationship with the ESL instructor while you were going through this process, and if you have any examples of how that kind of relationship might have played out as far as collaboration in the classroom, how it changed after this process started.
I wouldn't say it changed so much, because we had worked with each other at the beginning of the year, and I know that I agree with the fact that there has to be more communication between the ESL and the content teacher. I mean, the ESL teacher is the specialist. That's what, when it comes to teaching students, ESL students, they know what methods work best with these individuals that seem to struggle more. Not to give anything against content teachers, but myself, I'm a content teacher as well. But I mean, I found she's another resource that can be used in the classroom, especially when she's not in there, discussing with her different approaches that can be used. I think sometimes the content teacher might believe that they have it all figured out, but in all honesty, we can always learn, and as educators, we need to continue learning. And now that the number of ESL students is constantly growing in the States, but especially now if you're teaching abroad in an international school, you need to have more of that collaboration, because it's a lot easier for these students to fall behind. I found her to be very useful in the classroom, and she provided insight that I may have not seen or known about. And I will always continue to work with the ESL student. I mean, hearing what some of that research was saying about working together, if anything, I've always agreed with that there has to be more of a collaboration between the two. Because it has to be a team effort in order to get the best results and the highest achievement of the students.
I had a second question, but you answered it at the very end. Summary.
Are there any questions?
Just real quick, just as a last question, you said that one of the things that you wanted to work on was that you didn't incorporate much hands-on activities. Did you find a lot of room in the SIOP protocol to incorporate hands-on activities? Was that a lack of resources you felt at the school, or was that an inability to kind of bring those into the classroom on your own part?
I think in all honesty, I think it was maybe an inability on my part to bring that in. And ideally, when it came to teaching these literacy lessons, I was not really sure on how I can incorporate hands-on materials like to teach literacy as much. I mean, it's something when you teach science or social studies or math, where you can incorporate more hands-on stuff with those subjects. But when you're trying to teach the students, what's happening in the story, we predict what will come next. That's something where I wasn't too sure. And that was the one area where in the protocol I was given a 0, which makes sense, you know, or non-applicable, because it was mainly due to my inability, what I believe. As opposed to, yes, maybe there weren't enough resources here, but that was the part that I wasn't really 100% sure on how I can incorporate hands-on, because I do believe in the use of hands-on materials, but I just wasn't really sure what I can do with the students to incorporate it in terms of literacy lessons.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Nice work. Good luck.
Thank you. And that will conclude my oral defense. Thank you.